Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more Attaché films and continuing on with the Checkmate Lincolnite series. This time we are answering the question of, did the Confederacy have better generals? The answer is no. Thank you for watching. I will see you guys in the next video. Peace. Now, huh. Before I get too heated already, just thinking about what kind of arguments we're going to be hearing here, one of you on, I believe it was the General Sherman reaction, left a comment saying that the finale of the Checkmate Lincolnite series, Attaché is wanting reactors to not watch it quite yet. Is there a, like, where exactly is he, like, saying that? Just because I want to know where to check to know, like, when I am allowed to watch it. Like, obviously we still got a couple videos to go before the finale is all that is left, but I just want to make sure that I am respecting his wishes as best as possible, especially now that I've been made aware that of his wishes regarding the finale. So please do let me know where I can check that, or if he has already said, like, okay, reactors, I am fine with you watching it now, right? Like, just let me know down in the comment section. That'd be great. Thank you. But now, also, before we dive into this video, make sure you check out the other links in the description box below. I would love to join the Discord. Follow me over at Twitch, and do go check out the gaming channels here on YouTube. One is for long-form content, 3+ hour streams. I just upload my Twitch streams there, usually about a week after the streams happen. And then the other channel is an edited gaming channel where there will be 1 or 2 videos per month. Right now there is a Tales of Kenzera video and a Fallout 4 video. I am really proud of the Fallout 4 video for my, based upon what I know of my editing skills. I feel like I did a decent job. But with all that yapping said and done, let's go ahead and answer the question of who had the better generals. It's the Union, baby. Blue all the way. Come on, fuckers.
Checkmate.
What? No. There must be somewhere old Jeff Davis can go.
Nope. Might as well change his name to Norman C. Francis because he is done.
What?
Never mind, just some local humor.
Gracious. How long that game go on for?
7 months.
Well, this is ridiculous. I never stood a chance. You were fighting with one hand tied behind your back, what with all your industry and naval power and some such.
Naval power? What board game were you playing?
But I think we both know who were the finer soldiers, the men of the South. Never before, in all the annals of military history, were there a finer collection of officers at war than those of the Confederate States Army. Lee, Jackson, Forrest,
Longstreet.
we don't talk about him, Early, Beauregard, Mosby, and I'm sure there were some other ones too. Oh, the names of these men ring down through the generations as men of action, great masters of the art of war.
If they were so good, why didn't they win?
Ooh, got him.
Checkmate. Davis Sights.
USA.
I'm sorry, Billy, but
Union.
it simply does not have quite the same ring to it as Checkmate, Lincolnites.
No, yeah, you gotta admit, the Checkmate Lincolnites is such a good title. It is. It's great. It's got a good ring to it.
The program where we obliterate the righteous cause myth, a disgusting Yankee lie which dares to suggest that the sultry, balmy, beautiful South seceded
Love his the accent he puts on for fucking Johnny Reb. Oh, man.
from the Union over the issue
Beautiful.
of slavery. Could you imagine such a thing? Tonight, we shall prove once and for all the uncontested martial superiority of the Confederate soldier upon the field of battle. That's right, folks. The best generals were Southern. The Yankees won for a couple of reasons. They had more money and manpower. Given time, any fool can win a war of attrition.
Here's the thing, Confederates. You were on the defensive. You just had to hold out, and guess what? The manpower difference, really, between the Confederates and the Yankees wasn't so great as to if the Confederates were truly capable and competent enough, the manpower difference wouldn't have mattered in a defensive war here. Not to, at least it wouldn't have been enough to truly be a considerable factor in the Union winning. Now, the money, on the other hand, does lead them to, well, the Confederacy also had a lot of money based upon their agriculture, the cotton and stuff. So they did have money as well. But it was one of the big reasons was the infrastructure of the North with the train system. The Union could just move faster, just all around, right? Keep troops supplied better, etc., etc. Maybe just get good.
That was part of it, sure, but don't you think you're overstating the case?
Nope, 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 nope. No, sir. No, sir. We were doomed from the start, and we only held on for as long as we did because our brave boys fought like wildcats. In battle, one of us was worth 10 of you effete urban Yankees and your immigrant hordes. Not to
Okay, hold on. We're gonna look up the casualties here of the Civil War. U.S. Civil War casualties. Let's see, on each side. All right, so 360,000 men from the north are said to have died, and 258,000 from the south. So, certainly not a 10-to-1 ratio there, Mr. Johnny Reb. And, oh man, that is terrible statistics for a combatant fighting a defensive war. You're not even getting 2-to-1. That's embarrassing, dude. That's just sad. Oof.
mention our ingenious commanders who held on against the abolition army for longer than was thought possible, until after 4 years of arduous service, marked by unsurpassed courage and fortitude, we were compelled to yield to overwhelming numbers and resources.
Oh, I see what you're doing there. You're quoting Lee's farewell address after his surrender at Appomattox. You know, it's interesting because with the very verbiage...
You know who didn't surrender? General Grant. Take that, fucking Leeites. Really, yeah, it just does not sound as good.
...of that address, Lee abrogates his own personal responsibility for defeat. It was all just overwhelming numbers and resources, no other reason. Certainly not Confederate mismanagement or the competency and skill of the United States Army. I mean, no, that would be crazy.
Well, now I think you've really lost it. The North's industrial capacity was massive. See this photograph? This is the shipyard of one William Webb in the East River and Manhattan. This ironclad under construction is state-of-the-art, over 300 feet long, more than a match for any Confederate warship then in use. However, this behemoth would never face the Confederate Navy, for it was commissioned by the Italian Navy and would see service in the Battle of Lissa against Austria-Hungary in 1866. See, the North's industrial capacity was so humongous that it could not only more than provide for its own military, but for the militaries of other nations as well.
That's actually a really interesting tidbit. But, you know, God...
Yeah, that's actually really neat.
...isn't always on the side of the biggest battalions. History is full of wars where the side with the lower population and fewer resources won. You know, the Haitian Revolution, the Vietnam War.
I was literally about to say Vietnam.
The Winter War, the list goes on.
So, of course, Vietnam necessarily wasn't a loss due to military failings like the Confederacy, but more so a complete lack of support, political support, popular support. I don't think the USA ever lost any meaningful battle in Vietnam. Like, I think if we look at it from a purely military standpoint, the US was winning. But on the political and popular front, not at fucking all. Not at fucking all.
Hell, I think you guys had a better chance of beating us in the Civil War than we had of beating the British in the Revolutionary War. And once or twice...
Yeah?
You almost did.
Yes, if only Jackson had survived his grievous wound at Chancellorsville and went on to carry the day on July 1st at Culp's Hill. If only the Yankees had not found General Order 191 during the Maryland campaign, then old Moss Robert would have whooped Little Mac for sure. If only the British had joined us in the fight, and a great army of red and gray went marching all the way to Washington. If only
Didn't the Confederacy take Washington?
Sherman would have spontaneously combusted at the Battle of Chattanooga, then Atlanta never would have fallen. If only we could have cloned Jeb Stuart so he could be in both the Western and the Eastern theaters at the same time, that would have shown the Federals a thing or two. If only Judah P. Benjamin had unleashed the power of the Ark of the Covenant, melting the faces off of all those Yankee scoundrels.
I'd like to formally apologize for what he just said about Judah P. Benjamin.
The world, we surely would have won the war then.
Circling back, history has shown that a large industrial capacity doesn't always correlate with a nation's ability or willingness to make war. Lest we forget, there was substantial anti-war sentiment in the North throughout the Civil War, especially in the summer of '64, when the public perceived that the war was going extremely badly for the United States. Keep in mind, this was after Gettysburg and Vicksburg, when the tide supposedly turned against the rebels. Now, of course, in hindsight, it's easy to say, oh, well, the Confederacy was doomed at that point, but for people at the time, it was far from certain.
Yeah, it is very hard to see exactly how wars are turning as they are happening. Look at Ukraine. Like, there's been so much like back and forth over what is fucking happening there that it's really hard to say. We're not really going to be able to say what was the turning point for whoever ends up on top in Ukraine until years after the war is over, right? One example.
During the grueling sieges of Petersburg and Atlanta, there was a tremendous amount of public pressure on President Lincoln to enter into peace negotiations with the Confederacy. It was only after Sherman's capture of Atlanta and Sheridan's scourging of the Shenandoah in '64 that the public began to regain hope that the war could be won. If the presidential election of 1864 had been held in August instead of November, then Lincoln probably would have lost and George McClellan would have become president. And if his timid conduct as commanding general of the army is any indication of how he would have conducted the war as president, I think it's pretty safe to say he would have given the rebels ample opportunity to bounce back.
Timid, yes. On that we can agree. A fine administrator.
Not such a great field commander.
Oh, I was half expecting you to defend McClellan and proclaim him as some sort of military mastermind. But not even you would stoop so low. How's that humble pie taste, Billy?
It's a little dry.
Well, you conceded a point, so I shall graciously return the favor. Perhaps I did exaggerate the role of industry in federal victory. However, if industry didn't do it, then the Yankee tendency toward tyranny certainly did. In the 20s and 30s, historian Frank L. Owsley argued that the Confederacy had, quote, died of states' rights.
Don't use historians from that far back. I wonder, but I think that is purposeful by Aton Shea, to have Johnny Reb using a historian from that far back as a point. When you do historiography and you are making argumentation, you are supposed to be using the most recent historiography. Now, of course, for some fields, you cannot do that, right? Like the Anglo-Saxon field, a lot of it is going to be really me pulling from the early 2000s, the pre-2010s, early 2010s, and the early 2000s, but also some 90s and 80s. 90s and 80s had I think a decent surge, but yeah, that is largely where my study had me pulling from a wider span of historiography, because it is not as it's largely been done to death, really, and there isn't so much there's not really going to be new shit found regarding it unless some new excavations pop up. And there have been, I think, some talks regarding some new excavation sites, but still nothing new yet. There really isn't, right? So, yeah. But with a historical event like the Confederacy, like the U.S. Civil War, that is a very popular historical field, and especially in the United States of all places. So there is a lot more modern historiography that you should be pulling from when making argumentation regarding it. Now, of course, that's not to say that you cannot pull from older sources, but the way in which Johnny Reb here is pulling and using argumentation from from a historian from so long ago, not good. No, you don't do that. That's just not good argumentation.
Commitment to freedom was too great, that our states could not coordinate under a strong central power, and it hamstrung our war effort. What are your thoughts?
Owsley's full.
Because also what it kind of insinuates, when you pull from something so far back and you don't bring up any newer historiography to back it up, that pretty much means that at least it insinuates to me then that belief is no longer a widely held belief, thus meaning it's probably not an accepted reason anymore, right? If you're pulling, if really you can only pull that that argument and have it like work based on evidence by pulling from a historian from so long ago, then that tells me that is not an accurate argument, you know? Like, am I wording this right? I think I am. I hope I am.
Of shit. First off, his entire premise is a fiction. I mean, sure, Davis clashed with governors over stuff like troop allocations for local defense, but these were outlying events, the importance of which he greatly exaggerated. But more importantly, I just don't buy that the Confederacy's internal divisions were responsible for its defeat. The North had to deal with internal division that was just as, if not more intense than anything the South had to deal with. I mean, you take the 1863 draft riots, for instance, or the intense pressure on the Lincoln administration throughout the war for swift and spectacular battlefield victories, or the political polarization that followed the Emancipation Proclamation. Talk about hamstringing the war effort. No, any way you slice it, the Confederacy lost the Civil War on the field of battle. The Lincoln administration outmaneuvered them politically, and the boys in blue annihilated them militarily.
Hell yeah.
Sometimes when you start a bar fight, you end up on the floor. It happens.
I notice a hero worship of the Northern generals and seething hatred of the Southern generals from our SJW historian. Why am I not surprised? He's looking for a narrative to sell instead of facts.
Why don't we break it down?
Says the motherfucker supporting the lost cause myth. That's a goddamn narrative, you mother. Calm down, Ryan. Calm down. Deep breath.
What's so great about all these CSESH generals? Go ahead, Johnny. Ball's in your court.
I'll start strong, shall I? Thomas J. Jackson. He expelled the Yankees from the Shenandoah Valley in a near-flawless campaign and maneuver and decisively flanked Hooker's 11th Corps at Chancellorsville.
He also froze during the 7 Days battles when his lack of coordination with Lee and Longstreet caused horrifying numbers of unnecessary Confederate casualties. Look, I like Jackson, but I think his death was probably the best thing that could have happened to his reputation. He would have fallen from grace eventually. It was inevitable. I mean, could you imagine him fighting in the defensive grind of the Overland Campaign or the grueling trench warfare of Petersburg? His brilliance as an aggressive general was unmatched, but in many ways he was kind of a one-trick pony. And I think a compelling argument could be made that Jackson's offensive tactics ultimately did more harm than good. Take Chancellorsville, for example.
Because also, again, as I said somewhat at the beginning, the war for the Confederacy was one of defense, but they treated it too often as a war of aggression, as an offensive war. They tried fighting it by attacking the North, which, from a tactical, strategic standpoint, attacking the North isn't a bad idea, but it is them then ignoring. It's them ignoring their own limitations and the capacity of the North, right? Like, even them of this time period should have been aware of the infrastructure of capable of the North, the manpower difference, right? So, like, they should have been like the contemporaries were aware of the situation in the North. So really, part of me wants to blame it on Southern ego, as to why they were so aggressive. Like, they didn't need to fight it so aggressively. They could have fought it defensively and just tired out the North. Really, like.
Well, sure, he won a flashy tactical victory that fills the pants of military history nerds with buckets of jizz, but what did he actually accomplish in the grand scheme of things?
He smashed the 11th Corps of the Union Army.
Okay, and he got a lot of his own troops killed, troops that Lee could not afford to lose. Time and again, throughout the
And that's what happens when you go aggressive.
war, rebel generals tried to one-shot Union armies with dramatic Jacksonian offenses. Sure, they might maul a corps and gain a victory, but the Yankees always came back. They never realized that gambling everything on one climactic, decisive, war-winning battle
World War I vibes.
was just a plain bad bet, and it always cost the Rebs more than they gained.
Nitpicks, I say. You're finding fault where there is none. Stonewall Jackson was a mighty war chief, whereas the Union High Command, it was a veritable menagerie of nincompoops. Burnside, Pope, Butler, Banks, Meade.
Don't you dare talk shit about George Gordon Meade.
Oh, what? You'll scurry up to the top of a hill and wait for me to come charging after? Please, don't take much brains to defend high ground with superior numbers. The only reason...
Yeah? You're telling me fighting defensive is a good idea? That it gives a significant advantage to one side to fight cautiously and defensively? Keep going.
we did not carry the field at Gettysburg was because of that scallywag Longstreet, dragging his heels instead of launching his crucial offensive in concert with Ewell and Hill's corps. And then, once we retreated, that old snapping turtle Meade did nothing to pursue us, instead allowing us to return to Virginia unmolested, a fact that vexed Abraham Lincoln to no end. As the tyrant himself said,
"You fought and beat the enemy at Gettysburg, and of course, to say the least, his loss was as great as yours. He retreated, and you did not, as it seemed to me, pressingly pursue him. But a flood in the river detained him, till by slow degrees you were again upon him. You had at least 20,000 veteran troops directly with you, and as many more raw ones within supporting distance, all in addition to those who fought with you at Gettysburg, while it was not possible that he had received a single recruit. And yet you stood and let the flood run down, bridges be built, and the enemy move away at his leisure without attacking him. My dear General, I do not believe you appreciate the magnitude of the misfortune involved in Lee's escape. He was within your easy grasp, and to have closed upon him would, in connection with our other late successes, have ended the war. As it is, the war will be prolonged indefinitely. If you could not safely attack Lee last Monday, how can you possibly do so south of the river, when you can take with you very few more than 2/3 of the force you then had in hand? Your golden opportunity is gone, and I am distressed immeasurably because of it."
Ah, yes, he wrote that letter to Meade but never sent it, because he realized that no good could come from chastising him after the fact. God, Lincoln was so fucking classy. But you know, I think his criticism here was actually pretty unfair. What everybody seems to forget is that right after Gettysburg, Meade was under orders to keep his army between Lee and Washington, D.C. at all times. If he had just gone charging after the retreating Confederates, he would have been acting in violation of those orders. Also, his army had just won the biggest battle fought on North American soil. That's definitely a consideration. They'd lost a full quarter of their combat strength, and high casualties among high-ranking officers had effectively decapitated the Army's leadership. It was also pissing rain that whole week, making all military operations more challenging. And while the Army of Northern Virginia was waiting for the swollen waters of the Potomac River to recede enough to ford, they dug entrenchments and threw up earthworks. They wanted Meade to attack them there.
Didn't this beer used to be called Dixie?
Meade was no Jackson, right? He never attacked without good intelligence and solid knowledge of his enemy's dispositions. Was he a military genius? No. Did he make mistakes? Yeah, of course. But as far as I'm concerned, in the Gettysburg campaign, he did pretty much everything right. Lee didn't lose that battle. George Meade won it.
Very well, then.
Huzzah.
I propose we shift our focus to the Western theater.
Oof. You sure you want to do that, Johnny?
I do. Prepare to quake in your boots, Billy Yank, and allow me to present the most daring cavalry commander of the war. You know him. You love him. It's Nathan Bedford Forrest. Woo! 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 Woo!
Boo.
Woo!
Boo.
Nathan Bedford Forrest, right. Slave trader, Klan leader.
Repentant Klan leader.
Oh, well, that's okay then.
The South's greatest cavalry officer was indeed appointed first leader of the KKK. He tried his best to keep it an honorable organization. Robert E. Lee had been offered the job first, but feeling that it would violate his parole and feeling that a younger man was needed, suggested Forrest.
The Klan was never an honorable organization. It was founded explicitly to terrorize black people and deprive them of their rights as American citizens. Now, Forrest worked hard to keep his association with the Klan secret, but it's not all that hard to piece everything together. In 1871, he was actually called to testify before Congress as part of an investigation into the Klan's terroristic activities. Here's what he had to say when Vermont Congressman Luke P. Poland asked him point blank if he was part of the Invisible Empire.
Are you a member of the Ku Klux, General? I'm not, but I am in sympathy and will cooperate with them. I know they are charged with many crimes that they are not guilty
Fucking
of.
piece of shit.
What do you think of Negro suffrage? I am opposed to it under any and all circumstances, and in our convention urged our party not to commit themselves at all upon the subject. If the Negroes vote to enfranchise us, I do not think I would favor their disfranchisement. We will stand by those who help us, and I want you to understand distinctly that I am not an enemy to the Negro. We want him here among us. He is the only laboring class we have, and more than that, I would sooner trust him than the white scalawag or carpetbagger. When I entered the army, I took 47 Negroes into the army with me, and 45 of them were surrendered with me. I said to them at the start, this fight is against slavery. If we lose it, you will be made free. If we whip the fight, you stay with me and bigger boys.
What the fuck is this man saying?
I will set you free. In either case, you will be free. These boys stayed with me, drove my teams, and better Confederates did not live.
Black Confederates! Black Confederates!
They were Teamsters. Don't get excited. Come on, we've been over this.
Do you think the Ku Klux will try to intimidate the Negroes at the election? I do not think they will.
However, a black man named Andrew J. Flowers from Chattanooga also
Oh no, there's still 33 minutes left in this video. Oh no.
testified at the hearing, and he painted a very different picture of the Klan's activities in Tennessee.
Do you now hold some office?
Yes, sir. I am a justice of the peace.
When were you chosen Justice of the Peace?
I was elected on the 4th of late August.
Justices of the Peace in Tennessee elected by a vote of the people?
Yes, sir. I was elected by a vote of the people.
I want to inquire of you, particularly in reference to some violence, which it has been understood was committed upon you a short time ago. Tell us the story in reference to that.
On the 18th, between 11 and 12, or 10 and 11 o'clock, I cannot say exactly which, I woke up and there was a crowd of men, all with masks around me, with pistols in their hands. They waked me up. They called me by my name. They took me out near a mile from the house.
Tell all that they said.
They asked me what was my name. I told them. Then some of them said, "Oh yes, you are the man we are looking for," and so forth. One of them told me they were gonna kill me. He had a pistol in his hand. After they got me outdoors, the captain of the organization, they called him Captain, told me that he was going to whip me. Said he would give me 25 lashes. That I had the impudence to run against a white man for office and beat him. That they were not going to allow it. That it was an organization organized by them to stop Negroes holding office. And if they did not get out of office by being told or notified or whipped, they were going to kill them. They took me up about a mile from the house. They hit me as many as 25 times.
Did they take you into a woods or a swamp?
They took me through the woods into an old field, down near a swamp. I had never been there before. They took off my coat and whipped me with hickories 7 or 8 feet long. They said they were going to give me 25 lashes, and I guess they gave it to me. They told me that if I would promise to resign my office when I went to Chattanooga next morning, they would turn me loose. And I very readily promised it.
They required you to promise to resign your office.
Yes, sir.
Flowers went on to describe how the Klan was using intimidation and violence to keep black men from voting, along with many other acts of domestic terrorism that Nathan Bedford Forrest not only aided and abetted, but more than likely orchestrated.
Oh, you are dastardly Billy Yankin besmirching General Forrest, so you know as well as I that in 1875 he gave a speech to a black civics organization in Memphis in which he said,
We have but one flag, one country. Let us stand together. We may differ in color, but not in sentiment. Many things have been said about me which are wrong, and which white and black persons here who stood by me through the war can contradict. Go to work, be industrious, live honestly, and act truly. And when you are oppressed, I'll come to your relief.
The speech went over stupendously, and as the crowd erupted in acclamation, one African-American woman gave the old general a bouquet of roses and a peck on the cheek.
Yeah, he said that toward the end of Reconstruction, after the Klan's goal of reestablishing the antebellum social order had been accomplished. Southern Democrats were back in power at that point, and Forrest could afford to be magnanimous. I think his message here, though presented in a very nice and friendly way, was work hard, stay in your lane, and we won't have a problem. Now, I'll grant you this, man. It is also entirely possible that Forrest did have a genuine change of heart. I'm not discounting that. A lot of people at the time thought so. In fact, when
I don't think so.
a lot of Forrest's former comrades in gray heard about this speech, they shit a brick. One Confederate veterans group went so far as to publish this in their local paper.
Clean endorse no action unworthy of a Southern gentleman. I speak of the address delivered before a black and tan audience by General Nathan Bedford Forrest. With what a glow of enthusiasm and thrill of pride have I not perused the campaigns of General Forrest's cavalry, their heroic deeds, their sufferings, and their successes under the leadership of one whom I always considered, in my poor judgment, second only to our immortal Hampton. And now, to mar all the luster attached to his name, his brain is turned by the civilities of a mulatto wench who presented him with a bouquet of roses. What can his object be? Ah, General Forrest.
Well, Billy, I won't lie to you. That's really quite vile. Can we go back to talking about military history now?
Yeah.
I found it to be much more comfortable and safe.
One more point. Listen, Forrest is unbelievably overhyped, but he was a competent general. He was also a mass-murdering terrorist piece of shit and should be remembered as such. In my opinion, just about every positive mention of his generalship should be accompanied by extreme moral condemnation and acknowledgement of the U.S. colored troops he massacred without quarter at Fort Pillow.
But can't we celebrate his military achievements without glorifying his less savory attributes?
Yeah, and we could also celebrate Osama bin Laden's dexterous use of Expedia.com, but that'd be pretty fucking weird, wouldn't it?
You know what I think? I think you're compensating for something. Y'all didn't have a daring, brilliant cavalry commander on your side during the war, so you're just trying to knock one of ours down a peg.
I'll see your Nathan Bedford Forrest and raise you Colonel Benjamin H. Grierson, who led a ridiculously clever cavalry raid down the length of Mississippi during the Vicksburg campaign. Though the initial purpose of the raid was to cut the railroad east of Jackson, Mississippi, Grierson went above and beyond the call of duty, going from LaGrange, Tennessee to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, wreaking havoc all the while. Grierson and his troopers broke up 2 other railroads, destroyed weapons and commissary stores, burned storehouses, disabled trains, and freed slaves. All in all, they inflicted millions of dollars worth of property damage on Mississippi and permanently crippled that state's military usefulness for the rest of the war. They also diverted substantial numbers of Confederate cavalry that were badly needed in the defense of Vicksburg itself. But possibly most impressive of all, Grierson accomplished all of this at the cost of 3 men killed and 7 wounded. Contrast that with Forrest's raids. Sure, they were flashy and daring, but did they make a huge difference to the outcome of those campaigns? I wouldn't say so. And to my mind, I think you guys only had one strategically minded general who thought of things in terms of the big picture rather than individual maneuvers and battles. And he was, of course, Joseph E. Johnston.
Wait, who?
Joseph E. Johnston. I think he was the only senior Confederate general who understood that when you're fighting with limited manpower, you need to pick your battles, literally, very, very carefully. Most other rebel generals
And defensively, you motherfuckers.
thought of war in terms of attacking or defending dots on a map. They were very geographic in the way they went about it. But Johnston understood that when you're outnumbered and outgunned, stubbornly holding on to bits of dirt can often be counterproductive. Maneuver, even strategic retreat, can be much more beneficial in the long run.
There is no way to fight with honor.
Yeah, that's what Jeff Davis often said, which is exactly why Johnston hated him so much and privately talked all sorts of shit about Jackson and Lee. Whereas, it must be said, our side was full of keenly strategic military minds. Look no further than George Henry Thomas, the Virginian Unionist.
Yeah.
Like Meade, he was deliberate and never imperiled the lives of his men unnecessarily. But unlike Meade, he was creative. He was adaptable. He could always shift his strategy in the chaotic and ever-changing circumstances of warfare.
George Thomas, that is strange. I really haven't heard much about this faithless Virginian.
Well, that's because he was modest to a fault. In fact, he probably wouldn't want me to even mention him in this video, because he never wrote a memoir, and he even destroyed his wartime correspondences because he couldn't stand the idea of future generations picking over the events of his life. He also faced a lot of discrimination from his northern superiors because of his southern origins, and he was often overlooked for promotions and acclamations.
Typical.
I'm with you there. And ever since, General Thomas has been kind of forgotten about by historians, despite the fact that he was a huge badass. In a skirmish before the First Battle of Bull Run, he actually went toe-to-toe with Stonewall Jackson and kicked his fucking ass.
Let's fucking
At
go.
the disastrous Battle of Chickamauga, when
USA.
William Rosecrans, the Union Army commander, fled the field, Thomas remained behind, fighting on alone with his men against the whole Reb army, badly outnumbered and outflanked. And this holding action single-handedly saved the Army of the Cumberland from complete destruction. And 2 months later, United States forces would get their revenge at the Battle of Missionary Ridge, where Thomas and William Tecumseh Sherman orchestrated a frontal attack on the Confederate center that shattered their lines, and those lines, might I add, were entrenched on high ground. And then, in December 1864, Thomas faced off against John Bell Hood, who sucks, by the way, in the Battle of Nashville, and destroyed his army.
Yeah.
That's not hyper.
Y'all, I'm loving this episode. Because it's just straight up fucking destroying the Confederates and their pride, their belief in their generals, who fucking sucked.
Hyperbole. He literally destroyed it. The Army of the Tennessee was laid low. Its ruin smote upon the mountainside. There would be no more large-scale fighting west of the Appalachians for the remainder of the war. George Thomas never lost a movement or a battle, and may very well have been the best general on either side in the entire conflict.
Lord almighty. What else this fella do? Cure cancer?
Though as far as good Union generals go, there's one person that we haven't talked about yet.
Let me guess. Sherman. Do it again, Uncle Billy. Spare me your memes,
No, I think
sir.
Grant.
Besides, we've already done an entire episode about him.
No. No, 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 no,
General
no,
Grant.
no,
It's gotta be.
no,
The one that beat Lee, right? It's got to be General Grant.
no, 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 no,
Yes.
no.
Yes. Say it.
Sherman is but the apprentice.
Say his name. Say his words. What a wonderful day.
He is the master.
The fuck?
Sir, lords of the state, proposing armistice and appointment of commissioners to settle terms of capitulation is just received. No terms except unconditional and immediate surrender can be accepted. I propose to move
It's got to be General Grant. Yep.
Johnny. Hey! Are you alright? We were talking, you just started screaming. Are you alright?
Yes, Oh, fine.
There's one man they fear.
Just a minor hallucination.
Do you hallucinate often?
No?
Anyway, about Ulysses S. Grant. I mean, he was just a beast. I mean, that's the man
Ugh, an absolute madman. I mean, look at him. He's a good-looking man, too.
who saved the Union.
Oh, so now Grant wasn't a drunk and didn't run up a horrific casualty rate amongst his troops. Forget the lost cause. All currently revisionist history has done to canonize the North and demonize the South.
Well, that depends on what you mean by a drunk. I mean, he definitely abused alcohol, but whether he was a occasional binge drinker or you want some? Or a full-fledged alcoholic, I mean, that's kind of hard to determine. Cheers.
Cheers. If the Butcher Grant is the best you Yankees have to offer, then I'm afraid you are in a heap of trouble. For there is simply no comparison betwixt the Butcher Grant and old Moss Robert E. Lee. In the words
You mean Grant, the one who beat Robert E. Lee? Like, repeatedly?
of Jubilee,
Shall I compare General Lee to his successful antagonist? May as well compare the Great Pyramid, which rears its majestic proportions in the valley of the Nile, to a pygmy perched atop Mount Atlas.
nice one, Jubal. Wonderful use of very specific North African imagery. You really showed that Butcher Grant what's what.
You keep calling Grant a butcher. Why is that?
Because his generalship contained no spark of military genius. His idea of war was to the last degree rude. No strategy, the mere application of the wing's inertia. He had none of that quick perception of the field of action which decides it by sudden strokes. He had no conception of war beyond the momentum of numbers. Such was the man who marshaled all the material resources of the North to crush the little army and overcome the consummate skill of General Lee.
That's a very common and especially Eastern theater-centric misconception, and it mainly stems from Grant's battles against Lee in 1864, namely the Overland Campaign. And yes, to be fair, the casualties in that campaign were appallingly high on both sides.
And though y'all eventually won, your casualties were higher than ours. We lost approximately 33,000 men killed, wounded, or missing. Y'all lost 55,000 men killed, wounded, or missing.
Well, we were on the offensive during the Overland Campaign, and attackers do tend to take more casualties than defenders, especially since the war was becoming steadily more brutal, as tactics slowly transitioned between Napoleonic-style open field type warfare and kind of proto-World War I, deeply entrenched warfare of attrition. That was not the sort of campaign that Grant was trying to fight, by the way. He actually wanted to maneuver Lee into fighting an old-fashioned open field type of battle, where he could bring his superior numbers to bear more effectively. But it was Lee who decided to entrench, so he could better protect Richmond and Petersburg. It had been something he had been threatening to do for a very long time. But Grant was grimly determined and kept the pressure up until the United States achieved a costly but decisive victory.
But what about the Yankee defeat at Cold Harbor, or the Turkish shoot slaughter at the Battle of the Crater?
Yeah, I mean, those two failed attacks were huge mistakes and resulted in a horrendous and completely unnecessary loss of life. But it's important to understand that those missteps were the exception of Grant's generalship, not the norm. You see, Grant had a truly national view of the conflict. Now, there's no way to say this without coming across at least a little bit cold-blooded, but it's a tragic fact. The carnage of the Overland Campaign was necessary to bring the war to a timely conclusion, which Grant did after less than a year in overall command of the United States forces. Contrast that with his predecessors in the East, like McClellan or Burnside, who racked up significantly higher casualties than Grant did, with significantly less to show for it. Grant and Lincoln had a very specific strategy in Virginia at the end of the war, to grab Lee by the neck and to squeeze and to keep squeezing, never giving him a moment's repose, never allowing him for a second to even think about going on the offensive.
Mr. President, if we are to draw troops from the field, it will prove difficult to suppress the rebellion in the disloyal states. My withdrawal now from the James River would ensure the defeat of Sherman. General Grant, I have seen your dispatch expressing your unwillingness to break your hold where you are. Neither am I willing. Hold on with a bulldog grip and chew and choke as much as possible.
And as battered as Grant's army was, Lee's had suffered far worse, losing a full half of its combat strength in the overland campaign alone. And while the United States could always augment its forces with fresh troops, the Confederate states were running out of options. As Grant himself reflected,
The rebels have now in their ranks their last man. The little boys and old men are guarding prisoners, guarding railroad bridges, and forming a good number of their garrisons for entrenched positions. A man lost by them cannot be replaced. They have robbed the cradle and the grave equally to get their present force. Besides what they lose in frequent battles and skirmishes, they are now losing from desertions and other causes at least one regiment per day.
Sounds an awful lot like what I was just saying about overwhelming us with numbers.
Lee wasn't overwhelmed. He was outgeneraled. The Union
Damn
had
straight.
learned from experience
Hell
that
yeah.
superior numbers and resources don't win wars on their own. So what they needed was a general who could effectively utilize those numbers and resources, which is exactly what Grant did. He pinned the Army of Northern Virginia down in Richmond and Petersburg while Sherman ravaged the Deep South and closed Lee's back door. Joe Johnston and P.T. Beauregard, who were at that time defending Georgia and the Carolinas respectively, did all they could to keep that trap from swinging shut. But Lee, meanwhile, just froze. He stayed put, and he allowed himself to be obliterated.
Nonsense. Protecting Richmond and our center of government was essential to our survival as a nation.
Okay, but while Lee was busy defending Virginia to the last, Sherman snuck up behind him and rammed a boot up his ass. It was a losing strategy, and Lee is more culpable than you realize. For what shall it profit a man if he gains Virginia, but loses the whole South?
But for most of the war, Lee's entire mandate was his beloved Virginia. He wasn't even appointed General-in-Chief of all Confederate armies until February of '65.
Maybe not officially, but Lee was massively influential in the Confederacy and had been since 1862. And I mean, shit, he was the face of the rebellion. Lee was myopic about defending his home state, and multiple times, when key positions in the Western theater were under dire threat, he flat out refused to send any of his troops to help. In mid-1863, when Grant was tightening the noose around Vicksburg and the rebel army ensconced there, Confederate Secretary of War James Seddon urged Lee to send George Pickett's division west. Lee responded with a refusal, of course, and it was full of excuses, some reasonable, others bizarre.
The adoption of your proposition is hazardous, and it becomes a question between Virginia and the Mississippi. The distance and uncertainty of the employment of the troops are unfavorable. If you determine to send Pickett's division to General Pemberton, I presume it will not reach him until the last of this month. If anything is done in that quarter, it will be over in that time, as the climate in June will force the enemy to retire. I think troops ordered from Virginia to the Mississippi this season would be greatly endangered by the climate.
Oh, Lee is worse than I thought.
And the one time Lee did acquiesce to reinforcing the West, when he sent Longstreet's corps to North Georgia, it made a key difference in defeating the U.S. Army at Chickamauga.
And then the scallywag allowed himself to get licked by Ambrose Burnside, of all people. Pathetic. In any event, Lee was right. He was handily outnumbered, and he hadn't a man to spare.
Well then, why did he always get them killed at such an astounding rate? If anybody deserves to be called a butcher, it's Bobby Lee.
Moss Robert? No. He loved us. He never threw our lives away needlessly.
Except he totally did. Like, all the time.
Yes.
Nope.
My favorite. Robert E. Lee slander. I love this episode.
Nope. That's your boy Grant
Yep.
you're thinking of. He didn't care a whit about his men. He just threw waves of conscripted children to their deaths.
Let's crunch some numbers.
Lee's greatest victory was the Battle of Chancellorsville. His army was about 60,000 strong and suffered nearly 13,000 casualties, a net loss of 22%. His opponent, Joe Hooker, had an army 133,000 strong and suffered about 17,000 casualties, a net loss of 12%. The victory, though tactically brilliant, gained no ground for the Confederacy, reaped no major strategic benefit, and resulted in the death of Stonewall Jackson, one of Lee's best generals. Grant's greatest victory was the Siege of Vicksburg. His army was 45,000 strong and suffered 3,000 casualties, a net loss of 7%. His opponent, John Pemberton, had an army about 40,000 strong and suffered 7,000 casualties, dead, wounded, or missing, as well as a staggering 33,000 captured, a net loss of effectively 100%. The victory secured the Union's complete control of the Mississippi River and brought about the capture of the nearby state capital of Jackson. It ended rebel resistance in the region, exposed the Confederacy's soft underbelly of East Tennessee and Georgia, and was a crucial...
Now, of course, if we were to exclude the captured number and just look at the casualty rate, 7,000 still brings about a net loss higher than that of 7%, not to mention also that General Grant is attacking, whereas Pemberton is on the defense.
Step toward final victory. Throughout the war and the battles for which reliable statistics exist, Lee suffered an average killed or wounded casualty rate of 20.2% and inflicted an average killed or wounded casualty rate of 15.4%. In total, 121,000 of the men under his command were killed and wounded, the highest of any general in the Civil War. Grant, on the other hand, suffered an average killed or wounded casualty rate of 18.1% and inflicted an average killed or wounded casualty rate of 20.7%.
Number one, baby!
In total, 94,000 of the men under his command were killed and wounded, 23,000 in the Western Theater and 71,000 in the East.
Look, Lee was a good general. Sure. I venture to say he did a better job leading the Army of Northern Virginia than I would have done. I'm not trying to undo...
Of course, when we look at that, like, someone that went to fucking school and is led troops, fought in the Mexican-American War, yes, he should be a decent general, better than someone that does not go to general officer school. But also, as a man that has studied war tactics and has fought previously in a war, the man should be better.
Duly demonize him here or exaggerate his faults, but a military genius, the greatest field commander in American history? No. That's a fairy tale, born from more than a century of creepy pseudo-religious deification. In many ways, the comparison between Grant and Lee tells us all we need to know about why the war went the way it did. Lee led with the power of personality. He thought that war should be grand, sweeping, and heroic. He loved dramatic charges and clever tactical sleights of hand. He considered logistics to be an annoyance rather than an opportunity, which is why Confederate military history is full of flashy daring-do, but pretty short on substantial operational success. Grant, meanwhile, was all stubbornness and pragmatism. War was not a game to him. There was nothing poetic about it. Like his buddy Sherman, he believed that to wage war meant to bring it to a favorable conclusion as quickly as possible. And to achieve victory, he used every tool available to him. Deception, diversion, maneuver, relentless attack, and dogged defense, and never lost sight of the big picture. Battles didn't really matter that much in of themselves. They were just stepping stones toward the distant goal of ultimate victory. And that's why, for the most part, the Confederacy did not have better generals. You were obsessing over tactics while we were planning strategies. You thought small, we thought big. That's why we won.
Because we're number one, baby. USA.
Smugly conducted military campaigns 150 years after the fact from the comfort of your armchair.
This chair doesn't have arms.
Generalship aside, Lee was by far the better man. Look no further than how Grant and Lee treated their slaves. Grant kept his and said he not raise his sword to free any slave. Lee, on the other hand, freed his. He acquired them in marriage and treated them justly.
That's maybe like a quarter true. In the mid-1850s, Grant did manage about 30 enslaved people at his father-in-law's farm. By all accounts, he was a terrible slave driver because he was too gentle with them.
A woke slave driver is still a slave driver.
I couldn't agree more. And Grant...
Oh my god. A valid... Wow. Johnny Reb coming in with a valid point there? Wow.
Grant was, briefly, a slaveholder himself. He owned a man named William Jones for about a year before freeing him in March of 1859.
Yes, Grant was a slave owner, and General Lee was, of course, an abolitionist.
No.
He called slavery a moral and political evil. I have a quote.
In this enlightened age, there are few, I believe, but what will acknowledge that slavery as an institution is a moral and political evil in any country.
Yeah, and in that same letter he also says,
the systematic and aggressive efforts of abolitionists to interfere with and change the domestic institutions of the South are truthfully and faithfully expressed. The consequences of their plans and purposes are also clearly set forth, and they must also be aware that their object is both unlawful and entirely foreign to them, and can only be accomplished by them through the agency of a civil and servile war. The blacks are immeasurably better off here than in Africa, morally, socially, and physically. The painful discipline they are undergoing is necessary for their instruction as a race.
Motherfucker, what the
How long
fuck?
their subjugation may be necessary is known and ordered by a wise and merciful providence.
If Lee believed slavery was an evil, he thought it was a necessary one. And actions speak louder than words, right? Hiring records show that Lee personally owned people until at least 1852, and frequently sold or traded them away at his own convenience, even though that meant breaking up their families. Evidence from his personal letters shows that when Lee did free his slaves, he didn't do it out of the kindness of his heart, but rather because he hated supervising them and didn't want them around. When he briefly managed his wife's slaves at their house in Arlington, he was a notoriously cruel slave master and drove his people hard. As late as July 1860, he considered buying even more slaves and rented out slaves as personal servants throughout the entire Civil War.
Well, it's not
I'm not done. Politically, Lee consistently supported pro-slavery policies, and after the war upheld laws specifically designed to restrict the rights of freedmen. He also frequently expressed racist views, which were certainly very much in keeping with his time, but are still a far cry from our popular image of the kindly General Lee. During his time in Mexico, he found the people of that country to be
Weak, primitive in their habits and tastes,
he referred to Native Americans as
hideous, uninteresting.
and the only people he seemed to have any affection for at all were, predictably,
Though climate, government, and circumstance have produced changes in the character of people, yet in all essential qualities they resemble the races from which they are sprung, and to no race are we indebted for the virtues and qualifications which constitute a great people than the Anglo-Saxon.
And it's people like this that make it so hard to say that I'm an Anglo-Saxon historian. Like, come on. Come on.
Your sainted Grant is no better. Did you know that he was a rabid anti-Semite? In December of 1862, a handful of businessmen, some of them Jewish, were illegally selling cotton in Grant's military district. So he issued General Orders Number 11, which expelled all Jewish people from the area under his military control. The order read,
The Jews, as a class, violating every regulation of trade established by the Treasury Department, and also department orders, are hereby expelled from the department.
yeah, and the verbiage of the order reflects old European stereotypes about Jews too. So, a super bad look, and you will not find any argument from me. Unsurprisingly, or perhaps surprisingly, the order was met with general public outrage. Lincoln was horrified and immediately rescinded Grant's edict. And though the general insisted that it was all a big misunderstanding, the controversy would haunt him for the rest of his life. Especially during his presidential run, he issued multiple public apologies. Was he sincere? Who's to say? I mean, he was a politician after all. You know, Johnny, here's what I think it really comes down to as far as how we choose to remember these men. Here's what I think. Are you ready?
spit it out.
Here's what I think. Ulysses S. Grant was instrumental in bringing about the end of slavery in this country. Bobby Lee tried his very best to keep the damn thing going.
And he still fucking lost.
Agree to disagree. We always get diverted into talking about race.
It's almost as if racism and the Civil War are pretty closely interrelated.
I must say, sir, I found your arguments thoroughly unconvincing. And if I may be so bold as to remark, even more biased than usual. You know, I really don't like it when you say those sorts of horrible things about General Lee.
Look, Johnny, I'm not trying to pick on you, all right? It's just that lost causers have been sucking Lee's dick for 140 years. It's like the longest blowjob in American history, and it's left a real stain on this country. I'm not trying to paint him as some horrible monster. I'm just course correcting against generations of hero worship.
Well, could have fooled me.
if they are sounding like a monster and a terrible person, maybe that's because they are. Just a thought.
I believe, sir, that I shall take my leave of you now.
Come on, dude. Don't be like that.
See you in hell, Billy Yank.
See you in hell, Johnny Reb.
What's here for? Oh, is it just a? There's a post-credit scene. Oh no. 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 God damn it. Okay, and that was, did the Confederacy have better generals? Unfortunately, I did not really have much to say in this video, I feel like, in comparison to previous Checkmate Lincolnites videos, and that's largely due to me not being a military historian. I don't find military history all that fun to discuss. Really, I only kind of enjoy it when it's shit-talking Robert E. Lee and the Confederacy in general. Then I have a good time, but it's still not something that I really am knowledgeable about or find all that interesting as a discussion point. But yeah, that was Did the Confederacy Have Better Generals by Attaché Films. I hope you guys enjoyed. I certainly did. It was I would have liked more pulling from the audience, but maybe there really isn't much for him to pull from. I haven't been seeing too many comments from Lost Cause myth people in my own sections in this series thus far, so maybe there aren't that many to pull from. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.